So to start with, I'm just going to talk a little about our museum. We have nationally important collections. We have a badge from the government to say that we're important. It's just not just me. We run a whole program of lectures. So this is this is a lecture I've given to the Calne Heritage Centre, for example. We run conferences, talks. We have an education officer who goes out to schools, run children's activities, have university groups visiting, and we have special exhibitions on throughout the year, when things are, in inverted commas, normal, at least. So I'm going to start off by talking about Calne in the Roman period and sort of how it fits in the wider context. So this is a map from a while ago. There's a lot more dots and dashes and triangles and things, showing roughly how Roman Wiltshire works, if you see what I mean. The main thing in this area is the east-west road, the Roman A4, and you'll see it comes into Wiltshire, and there's the small Roman town of Cunetio, which is just to the east of Marlborough at Minor. Then Verlucio, which is the small Roman town you may never have heard of, before the road heads off past Box and ends up in Bath. Now, Verlucio is a significant Roman town. We'll be coming back to that. Now, in terms of Calne itself, it's not on the Roman road, it's off the Roman road. And these dots are from the council's historic environment record, and they show various bits, various traces of Roman settlement has been found in the Calne area over the years. So to start with, I'll just sort of highlight what they are. A whole set of burials have been discovered down at Blacklands, on the London Road, not far from Kenneford, and also off towards Bowood. Now, the significant one about the ones near Kenneford is that there are lead coffins. Now, lead coffins are unusual in the Roman period, and they mean people have got lots of money. Sometimes they're associated with Christianity, but the key thing is that you need an awful lot of lead to make a coffin. I've lifted one, so I know. And so these were not cheap. Now that suggests that there's some high status settlement in the area around Calne. We know there's a whole set of farms discovered, particularly the one on the relatively new housing to the north of Calne. These are small scale farms, just like you see today, ordinary settlement. And there's a bit of evidence for trade and industry, so definitely ironworking out to the west, and a pottery kiln down towards the south. So it's not just a pure agricultural landscape. And then we also have a number of what are called villas, essentially posh houses. So today these would be equivalent to manor houses, sort of the type you get one in each village, and a string spread out sort of through Bowood essentially. And that's what we know about the picture of the Romans in Calne. Now, a number of years ago, so just over about 10 years ago now, was the Archaeological Society of the county. A number of our members have formed the Archeology field group, and you can see all the dots on the map. They ran a project asking people in the town to record and bring in things that they'd found in their gardens. And so this is, if you like, a more accurate map of where Roman things are in Calne. But this could be everything from a single piece of pottery upwards. But it does give a much broader picture of the amount of stuff that was happening in the Calne area. And that axis along the A4 to the west of Calne is really quite interesting. And I guess it's quite feasible that that was a small Roman road leading towards Verlucio. Now, in terms of some of the finds, these are in the museum from an excavation at Calstone, but these give you an idea of the sorts of things that people are finding in their gardens. So this is a flange pottery bowl made near Oxford, what's called Oxford ware, this sort of posh fruit bowl that you might have on your table, and a Roman dog dish, as they get called, but again, this is a serving dish with very fine lattice decoration. That's made near Farnham in Surrey. And this is quite remarkable. It's a beaker for drinking wine, probably made in the Rhineland part of Germany in about AD 200. But the place where it ended up being buried after it was broken dates to about 300, so it was over 100 years later. So this was kept as an heirloom. And again, this shows that people were wealthy, because this stuff is not locally made. It's coming quite a distance. No trucks, so this was coming on the back of a wagon. You know, moving things about, although the Romans did have good roads, it still was not simple. And so, you know, it does show that people in the area had quite a lot of money. Now, rather closer to the centre of Calne, the project actually undertook some excavations at Castle Hill. And the idea, not surprisingly, was to find the castle, which wouldn't have looked anything like this, which is what you think of as castle. It would have looked a little more like this. The castle being often being really a defended manor house rather than sort of a military installation as such. Now, the location in Calne is Castle Hill, and this is an aerial view with the A4 running up here, the town hall just there to situate it in the park, and the excavations took place in this sort of area, in Castlefields Park. And the castle name has been attached to this area of town for a long time. And in 1242, it was known as Castlefield. So there's a long tradition of it being a castle of some sort. The field group undertook some excavations and found a whole bunch of things. A lot of much later disturbance. The area had been extensively used for quarrying, and this really substantial well, which was too deep to excavate fully, is almost certainly from the medieval period. It's quite from a substantial manor house. However, they also found a little bit of wall in the bottom of one of the trenches, and these. Now, the 3 sherds of pottery you see at the top is what's called Samian ware. This was made in France in roughly 100 AD, give or take, and a couple of Roman coins. And as well as this, there were some tiny fragments of tile, which are called tesserae, and some fragments and painted wall plaster. Now, tesserae come from a Roman mosaic floor, and the painted wall plaster is something that really is posh. So together, these things indicate there's actually quite an important Roman house, a Roman villa, under what's now Castlefields, which is really quite significant. This is top-notch stuff. Now, Historic England have investigated the area they did a whole series of aircraft flights looking at crop marks. And what you'll see here, this is the main area they were covering, the Avon Valley, but you'll notice this little tongue sticking out here, and this is an enlarged version of it. And all the various lines and things are bits of settlement, some of them Roman, some of them from other periods. And what that shows is Zerozine on the Roman town of Cunetio. So as most of us have no idea where it is, this is the road coming in from Calne to Sandy Lane. So this is Sandy Lane. This is the road down to Bromham and Devizes, and this is heading up past Bowood to Chippenham. Sorry, that's the road in from Calne. Sorry, that road there. And so this is a substantial Roman town. And these sort of rectangular plots you can see here are Roman fields. So the town was on the Roman road. It probably was a staging post. Think of it like a service station and would have been sort of half a day's journey from next one to the east, which would have been half a day or a day from the one just outside Marlborough. And the next stop almost certainly was Bath, just so you get an idea of how that works. And Historic England also did some geophysics, looking at what's under the ground. And here you can see some of the plots showing field systems, essentially ranch boundaries, and the top by what's called the Waste, so that's just to the north of Sandy Lane, what may be a temple enclosure. Now, that I hope has given you a bit of a context for the Calne in the Roman period. So we know there's some interesting stuff here. We know there's some important houses, probably at least 2, and then on to the sculpture. So this is a photograph that that we got emailed about 4 years ago, something like that, from Angelo Harrison, who's the bursar at the school, St Mary's School in Calne. And he said, "Is this anything important?" As you can see, covered in moss, and you see the neat scale of the boot alongside, which gave us a clue as to what the size of it was. Now, my colleague, Lisa, the curator, went off to go and pick it up, thinking that this was one of a really interesting type of sculpture called the three martres, the mother goddesses, not realizing quite how large it was. But we decided, yes, this was probably quite important. And then this is where it was found. So these are the grounds of St Mary's School, and the school buildings are off to our right here in this photograph. And this lump of stone came from a number of bits of stone round about here. Now, when you look at the first Ordnance Survey map, that location is just here. That's the house we were just looking at, and the pile of stones come from here. Now, the key words to look at here are quarries and lime kiln. So what was happening in this area was that it was being quarried and the limestone burnt to make lime to improve the soil. Now that means that the whole of this area has been quarried away, and anything archaeological will have disappeared. So we have no idea really where this stone comes from in any more detail than that, and what else it may relate to, where there's any other bits of it. Now, just to give you a clue as well, the British Museum have this in their collections. So this is a piece of stone. You can see the size of it. That's a centimetre scale at the bottom, with holes drilled in the corners. Now, this is not Roman. It's slightly older than that. It dates to the Beaker period, to about just after 2,500 BC. Now, what you can see on screen now is an illustration of a Beaker period burial excavated at Roundway Down, just above Devizes. And this chap buried on top of Roundway Down, looking down over the town. And he's buried with a number of things. So you can see at his feet, he's got a beaker. This is a drinking vessel. This particular one has parallels in its design and decoration with ones found in Germany. A bit of stone I'll come back to. This is a copper dagger, the largest copper dagger in Britain, and the metal for it comes from Austria, from the Alps, and he has an arrowhead, which shows that he had a bow and arrow. He was an archer. This piece of stone that you see is what's called an archer's bracer. So if you've ever done archery, you'll know that you put you have a piece of leather that you strap to the inside of your wrist, so that when you let go of the bowstring, if it hits there, it hits the leather patch. It doesn't hit the inside of your wrist. That's important because that piece of skin, that area, is some of the most sensitive on the body. So if the bowstring hits it, you really know about it. Now these bits of stone decorate one of these archer's bracers. Now the stone is not local. It comes from here, which is the Langdale Pikes in the Lake District. So it's a really hard igneous rock, and it would have taken several hundred hours to shape and then to drill the holes. So this shows that there was a really important Beaker period burial on the site, which is interesting. So this is one of the few aerial photos I can find of it before the school grounds expanded. And this is the site where the stone was found, and you can see that this is from the 1920s, and even then the quarries had disappeared, had been grassed over. So unfortunately we know little more about the context of the sculpture. Now after it was found, it was brought back to the museum, and here it is, brought by Angelo and his team, and we invited this chap, who is the Reverend Dr. Martin Hennig, to come and look at it. Now, Martin used to be Keeper of Antiquities at the Ashmolean Museum, and what he doesn't know about Roman sculpture is not worth knowing. He is it. And you can see him here looking in detail at the stone. And the stone's been next to the radiator for a few days, for a few weeks to dry it off. He came up with an idea of what the stone may be. Now, to look at it properly, it needed conserving. And this is Andrew Zeminski, who is on the call with us, I think, and me lifting it into the back of his van. Adam runs Minerva Stone Conservation and is extremely skilled in conserving monuments of all types. So in Devizes, for example, he and his team have restored the Market Cross. So when he got it back to the lab, and he can tell you more about this afterwards, this is what it looked like. You can see it's a bit of a mess. And the first step was to start pulling off the moss and then cleaning it, steam cleaning with a fine nozzle. And you can see how that's bringing out the decoration. Then he put a clay poultice on it and left it for 3 weeks. That was to draw out some of the roots from the stone. And then he did additional cleaning work and prepared it. And then finally, that's Andrew, one of his colleagues, bringing it back to the museum. So that means we can see a bit more of it than we could when Martin was looking at it. And then Martin came back and we had a real conference to look at what it might be, along with Tony Hack, who took some amazing photographs of it that I'll be talking about in a moment. Now, this is the sort of thing I thought it was. This is the three martres, mother goddesses, and this is a carving, a sculpture that you would have had in your house, and this is from one from near Cirencester. Now, these things are generally quite small slabs. They're sort of the size of a computer screen, generally quite thin, and you can lift them up quite easily. As you'll see, as you will have seen from me and Andrew trying to get it into the back of his van, this is rather larger than that. So it does not show the three mother goddesses. And the cleaning up showed a number of things. So to start with, we've got 3 figures. You can perhaps see here there's a cross piece and 2 bits hanging down. These are scales. There's a rope here, and then somebody here standing, they're holding something in their hand. Now, this is where Martin came in, because he recognized straight away that these are the 3 fates. Well, they're not actually fates. The fates are Roman. These have the attributes of being the Greek equivalent, what are called the Parcae. So you have Clotho, the spinner, the one in the center, who's spinning the thread of life. You have the one on the right with the scales. She is measuring out the length, how long you should live, and then the one on the left with the measure was measuring out the length of the thread of life and deciding at what point it should be cut. So if we go back, you've got, this is the thread of life, this is the balance, where your life is being weighed, and this is measuring out the length of your life. And it's possible that these, or perhaps here, may have been shears for cutting the thread. Now, this is a remarkable piece of sculpture. There's nothing quite like it in Britain. There's one possible fate sculpture from near Carlisle, but otherwise the best parallel that Martin could find is this wonderful engraving, which is the town of Igel in Luxembourg. And what you can see here is this carving of the fates as part of a huge Roman monument. This is a Roman monument. This is not something later. And amusingly, you can see how there's a church nearby, and picture and a carving sculpture of the crucifixion has been put nearby to sort of Christianize this site. And this is what it looks like now. Slightly different sort of context, but you can still see the church behind the buildings on the right. So it's now in Germany, near Trier. And that's it in close-up. Now, I mentioned Tony Hack, and one of the things he did, and this really helped in working out what this sculpture was he'd used a technique called RTI, resonance. Sorry, I forgot exactly what it stands for. I'm sure he'll correct me at some point. RTI Imaging, and what that consists of is taking a whole series of images. I think he took about 40 or 50, stitching them together under dark light. And then, unfortunately, I can't show you this on screen, but what you can then do is move the light around virtually on your computer screen. And that means you can draw out different details within the sculpture. So if we go back, the thing that really is still puzzling us, because we've not, the specialist who really needs to look at this hasn't had a chance to visit yet, you might see there's a whole series of things up on this top border of the stone. Now, this is where you start to go cross-eyed and wonder if you're imagining things, because is that an O? Is that a V? This could be an inscription. The other thing, looking at it, which is really interesting, is that I think it's just there. There's the remnants of a nail that's been hammered into the stone. And one of the things the Romans did was that they would write, you may have seen them in Bath, they would write curses on pieces of lead, roll them up, and then in Bath they throw them into the baths. In other places, they write either curses or prayers onto lead sheets, and then would nail them to monuments. So that again seems to be what's going on here. And then the other thing that Tony was able to do is use those photographs to create a 3D model. And I'll show you where you can find that in a moment. And so we'll be able to play with that, and you can see it on screen. And what we were then able to do was from that 3D model, a company called ThinkC 3D printed out a 3D version, quarter scale, and that is now in the school. So that's on display in the school, and at the museum we've got the original rather large stone. And this is my colleague Lisa with the stone and the 3D print. Now, what this says about what I haven't really explained is what this parallel of the Fate statue means that this piece of sculpture is. And the answer is that it is a part of a monument rather like this, not quite as large, not quite as grand. But if you think about what it looks like, it's meant to be seen face on. This was not flat on the ground. This would have been at sort of at least waist high, if not at shoulder height. So you'd be able to look at it. You'd be able to see it as you walked past. This is almost certainly part of a funerary monument, not just a tombstone, but a huge funerary monument. It's probably going to have been at least 10 feet high. This would have been one of a whole series of blocks, and Andrew spotted that there are traces of mortar on each side and top and bottom. So this was mortared into a much larger monument. Think of it something the size of something like a minibus. So what someone has done is to commission this funerary monument, and it shows how important they are. And this must be one of a number of panels which is talking about how important the afterlife this person is going to be in the afterlife. And as I said, these are not the Roman fates. These are the Greek fates. So this person is saying, not only am I posh, have I got lots of money, but I am learned. I'm interested in Greek culture and religion and literature, not just Roman. And this puts this piece of sculpture sort of right up there as one of the most important in Britain. It is not impossible that this is the tomb of, if you like, an assistant governor or governor of one of the provinces of Roman Britain. That at Calne, this was their posh country house, and this is where either they died or where they were buried. So this is the tomb of one of certainly the most important in Roman Britain at the time when he died. And so it's really, disappointing that what we assume is that the rest of the tomb, the rest of the stones were burnt and used as fertilizer. But there's this tantalizing clue from Castlefields that the posh house that was his may have been under on Castlefields, so across the other side of the town centre. So it shows that Roman Calne was really very important. It was on the main road, just equivalent for the Romans of the M4, between London, capital city, and Bath, just as in the Georgian place period, the place where you go and relax. And there are a whole number of large, posh country houses in and around this area, which obviously were places where people could come, relax, while all the slaves are doing the hard work of growing the crops, tending the animals and so on. And the posh people, the magistrates, the rulers could put their feet up and enjoy looking over the view and the river in Calne. So I think that's it from me. When this lockdown finishes, if you've not been, you can come and visit the museum. Please do. We're the 6th top-rated attraction on TripAdvisor. The last thing I was going to do was to show you the 3D model, and hopefully I'll go to our website. Oh, sorry, I've just got to reshare with you. So you should now be seeing our website. We start from the home page. Good luck. There we go. And if you go to the Collections tab, Collections Highlights, and if you go down to 3D Models. So we have three 3D models done of our collections. Mammoth Tooth and West Kennet Beaker were done as part of a TV programme. The Calne Fate sculpture is here. And on the right-hand side, this sort of explains a little about it. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that you can click on the Sketchfab model. When I finish this talk, I'll be uploading this talk so that onto this page, so that people will be able to find out more about the sculpture and how important it is. So this is the 3D model when it comes through. It's just loading. There we go. And you can make it full screen. And you can play around with it. And see how if you get the angle right, see how what maybe this inscription at the top comes into relief. Don't look in the back. Looks a bit weird, but you can zoom in and look at the details for yourself. And this is the 3D model that was used to produce the printout that's at the school. Right, that's me done. I'll unmute everyone. So if you would like to ask any questions, I'm happy to try and have a go. I'll just have a glug of water first, but if anyone would like to ask a question, just fire away.
David, thanks very much for the presentation. I was rather worried about how thick the stone was, and I think you've really answered it all. I did think it was roughly 6 foot to 8 foot high because of its thickness, and that really does resolve it.
Yeah, the tomb would have been something like 6 or 8 feet high, because this was meant to be seen certainly from shoulder height. And Martin Heddig suggested it might even have been higher to be seen from horseback. Because you can imagine if people are going past, the posh people would have been on horseback, but certainly 8-10 feet high. It was a substantial bit of sculpture, and this isn't the only bit of sculpture that would have been on it. You can imagine the base might have been fairly plain, but I'm sure there would have been a band of sculptures.
Yeah. The other really important thing was the 3 figures did give a demonstration of what it's like to be in life. People were seeing it, seeing your life as a piece of string, and that the string gets cut when you pass away. It's just amazing how they used to think that way and formed it into art as a presentation.
Yeah. And it's quite, although the fates and the parki are well known, I don't think there's that many sculptures of them across the Roman Empire. So well known from literature, but not something that's very common. Martin had great trouble finding similar examples.
Right.
I don't know, Andrew, you're on the call. Would you like to say anything about about conserving the sculpture, or what you think about it?
Hi, David. That was really great. I learned so much. Thank you.
I don't think you did. You were there when Martin was telling us all about it.
Well, the years slip by and my memory gets a bit hazy, these matters. But it was so interesting that the stones from Hazelbury Quarry, just outside of Corsham.
I forgot that. Yes, thank you. Thanks for reminding me.
It's got a very particular grain to it that is makes Hazelbury fairly easy to recognise. It's got a sort of. I remember as I was unpeeling the layers of moss, encountering these sort of mollusk fragments that were like fingernails just sticking through in a very thin bed. And that's a bit of a Hazelbury giveaway. Yeah. And that, of course, is very used very extensively in the Roman period, and indeed up to Anglo-Saxon and into the 18th century. So it had a great span of use.
Yeah,
but
I remember you saying you thought it was from there, and then Martin brought along a student who chipped a bit off and subjected it to sort of microscopic analysis and said exactly the same.
Yes, exactly.
You know your stone.
I know that, yeah. I also know my mortar as well, and it was, I mean, so thrilling to uncover just these little scraps of mortar on 3 sides of it.
Yeah.
Just
from memory, it's on the left, right, and top.
Yeah, but they're opus signinum. They're a lime mortar that has an aggregate of crushed terracotta, which is obviously a Roman method of gluing stones together. So that what's really nice about that, if one's doing a bit of detective work, is that it suggests that it was built into a Roman structure, and if the Saxon, if someone had taken a shine to it and wanted to stick it in their wall of their cottage or whatever, then it would have been a very different type of mortar. So very good to have found that.
Yeah, it's a real discovery, and it's really important. I think Martin's in the process of writing it up for Britannia, which is the main archaeological journal for Roman studies.
Right.
So hopefully that'll get published before long. But we really need the chap down to come and look at that possible inscription.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting that the nail is square in section as well.
I've quite recently done it.
So I bet there's a Roman nail expert that could tell you something about that. They're out there, aren't they?
There's an expert for everything.
Yeah.
Is it anyone have any questions? Anything they'd like to ask or say? No? Okay. Well, in that case, I'll sign off in a minute. I'm doing another one of these talks on Friday at 11:30, I think, which is about the Devizes prisoner of war camp. And then a week today, in the afternoon, I'll be talking about the Laycock Cup. That's a piece of medieval silver that we bought jointly with the British Museum for a mere £1.2 million, and was at the church in Laycock. Piece of amazing medieval craftsmanship. Okay, so thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the talk. And as I say, this will be going up online. So if anyone you think would be interested, do let them know. It'll be available from that page about the sculpture. I'll be sticking the recording on the bottom of that page in due course. Thank you, everyone. And thank you particularly for the person who's given us a very generous donation. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thanks, David. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye.